Hey, everybody, this is People of Substance by LemonSkies. I'm Olga Woltman, and I'm excited to introduce my guest today, Peter Genuardi. Peter is a founder of a company called See the Stars. He can talk about that in a second. Can you please say hello?
Hey, good morning or good afternoon. Uh, yeah, well,
So, you and I have known each other a really long time.
we have. I did the math this morning, Olga, and it's about 20 years.
20
Like the
years.
notion that like you have known me for just about all of my meaningful career, and I've known you is pretty wild. I feel like every time when we get together and we get to work on a project or we end up in the same meeting together, I always try to tell this story. So I hope let me tell the story about one of the first times we ever hung out. And gosh, I can't remember. I think it was our friend Sarah's birthday, and you and
Probably.
I went from like a work meeting to meet at this restaurant, and we were sitting next to each other. We were just chatting, and there was this woman that worked with me who knew that, oddly enough, at the same time, I was engaged to a woman named Olga. And so she just naturally assumed that you were this woman and didn't think twice about it. Well, then your fiance, now husband, Dan, showed up and sat down next to you and gave you a very nice embrace. I think this is a family program, so I won't say more than that. But like the size of her eyes like just got huge because she thought that somehow I was sitting next to my fiance, and all of a sudden she's kissing this other guy. And so I feel like we had such a good laugh. Like I have to tell the story every time we get together.
It's a good story. And I will say, I just vividly recall somebody asking me, where's Peter at one point? And I was like, I don't know.
Right.
Like I don't keep tabs on his comings and goings. So yeah. So socially it's occasionally been awkward. So
Yeah, well, here we are. Thank you so much for inviting me to catch up with you today on your People of Substance series. I'm curious. Before we dive in, can you just tell me, like, why do you call it People of Substance? I mean, I've watched a ton of the videos. I love the people that you interview, but tell me, like, why People of Substance?
yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like I'm in the hot seat today. So it was really an excuse to have more conversations with people I know and like. And then it evolved to getting to know new individuals that I may or may not have known for a dozen years. And the idea was to just really get a little bit past the veneer of like, here's what I do, kind of the elevator pitch spiel, and just to really talk about the work we do in the nonprofit sector, to talk about but also to get to know individuals that are powering the nonprofit sector, getting to know what they're interested in, getting to know a little more about their interests, hobbies, passions, etc. So that's how it got originated. And it's been a couple of years, so I should count up how many episodes I've done, but I think it's been probably about 50 so far.
Wow, that's amazing. One of your guests recently talked about this notion of people who are self-appointed thought leaders, and so many of them, and I felt terribly seen when I was listening to her talk about this, but she basically made this point that we just regurgitate tons of the content that has been out there, the ideas that have been out there, and I think a lot of times those things deserve to be kind of renewed and brought back to the surface, but a lot of it is just it's just fluff.
Right.
It's not novel. And I think with this series, you do such a great job of actually creating new content by asking people to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So Olga, I wonder today, I know I'm your guest today, but I really thought perhaps today I could flip the script on you and I could interview you. So do you mind if I dig in some questions about you so the people watching?
I knew I was going to be in the hot seat, so great.
Well, look,
I can roll with it.
You're one of the smartest people I know, and you're a terrific strategist. You do so much great work. I'd love to just interview you today if you're okay with it.
I'm up for it.
All right. Well, let's start at the beginning. I've known you for 20 years, and when I met you, you were working for one of the leading agencies in the space, and you're doing some great work as we were just like introducing email as one of those tools to get in front of people to compel, folks to donate, to take action, to volunteer, and that sort of thing. But I'm curious, like, how did you get into this industry? Like, where did you start?
That's a great question. I'm not sure there's really a very clear pathway. I think deeply I've always intended to do something positive, but I'm not sure I knew much about nonprofit space as a space or as a professional path. I studied out in Washington, D.C. As a college student for about a semester. And I think that's where I really started getting exposed to nonprofit sector. And, you get your first job and one thing leads to the next. And then at some point, you sort of like that's what you know and that's what you stay with. And then over time, you come to appreciate what it does.
That's so interesting. I feel like that's how a lot of us have found our way in this sector. But again, I'll say it again. You're one of the smartest people I know. Why would you do this for the organizations that you've supported over the years instead of, working for Coke or Pepsi or any other commercial company?
I cannot imagine being a cog in the big corporate wheel. In all of my nonprofit roles, you have your distinct function, you have your role and set of responsibilities, but inevitably you have that broader view on what the organization does, and you have broader involvement. If you're a fundraiser, you're still involved in mission. If you're a communicator, you still talk to people across the organization. So I think, candidly, I just cannot imagine being in a job where you have like a tiny, teeny piece of the puzzle, but you never really see the greater whole. So I think that's part of it. And then some of it is, this is what I know. This is where I've grown up. And, it would be kind of hard to switch midway through, and just a different kind of bottom line in our sector.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, listen, I'm so glad we have you working in this sector instead of anywhere else. I'm pretty familiar with your work. I mean, I think the organizations that you've worked for, you've been able to really serve and make a huge difference in terms of building their audience and keeping people engaged and getting people to donate and do all these other things that are really meaningful to supporting an organization. I think one of the things that I've just been really interested in your approach over the years about is really your focus. You don't go out there and brand yourself as a fundraiser, right? I know that you're one of the best fundraising strategists out there, but you really have this great focus on storytelling. I wonder if you could talk to me about why do you prefer to talk about fundraising? I'm sorry, why do you talk to us about storytelling as opposed to the kind of the nuts and bolts of fundraising, right? Like, I know you understand all of the analytics, all of the numbers that go into building programs and measuring engagement and all of those things. But really, your focus on storytelling, I think, is really interesting and very helpful. But I'd love to hear kind of why you think that that's an important lens to look at this kind of work through.
Yeah, so I think, kind of the nuts and bolts are very tactical. But if you sort of take that larger aerial view at why we give, it's an emotional act. It's seldom purely, maybe you have the kind of tax bracket where contributions are really making it or breaking it for you. But generally speaking, it's an emotional commitment. It's sort of and we don't connect through numbers. We don't connect because of mechanics. I don't want to diminish the importance of a form that functions and processes your contribution. And we connect through stories, not through metrics. So I'm interested in what leads up to contribution, and I'm interested in what happens after the contribution, and kind of blurring that line between, I feel like we used to try to delineate fundraising from marketing and communications, and that line is very, very blurry. So I'm less interested in mechanics of the actual act of giving, and I'm much more interested in what leads up to it and what happens, how we communicate impact after the fact.
I love that perspective. I think, you touched on something that I think a lot of organizations are trying to come to terms with in the last few years. And that is that oftentimes we put up these walls between how we communicate and how we tell stories. It seems to me that we as a sector here are, focused on telling one story to the people that we want to donate, perhaps a slightly different story to the people we want to volunteer or write to Congress. And then there's this giant wall between so many of the people that we seek to serve. And so I think that, that approach of storytelling that really kind of scoops up everything that an individual would like to do to support or consume services from an organization really becomes it puts this imperative on the table for us to tell a story that is really the biggest possible story we can tell. And it's not, it's not like it's not like a it's not like there are different chapters of that story that are some of them only apply to me because I'm a donor, and some of them only apply to me because I'm someone who gets service from an organization or cares about a particular piece. And I think that storytelling approach really puts that imperative on the table for us.
Yeah.
Who do you? I hate to put you on the spot, and if you don't want to share, please just tell me next question. But who are the organizations that you think are doing a great job? What brands are doing a great job of storytelling today?
So I'm going to kind of turn to what I know well, and I'm going to say that Special Olympics has always done a phenomenal job. I worked at Special Olympics for a number of years, and I've been volunteering with Special Olympics Virginia, and the stories are just really, really compelling. And they're not. There's an art and a science to a positive story, to a good story that leaves an impact, and I think it's really done wonderful job over the years, and wonderful job of connecting not just to people who are themselves immediately or their immediate family members are impacted, but connecting to kind of this broader values and things that we share, so that you may not have a family member with an intellectual disability, you may not be impacted yourself, but you find it relatable and feel positive and feel compelled. So I would say that's the one that comes to mind, but there, there's many organizations that are crushing it and many less so. That's where people like myself come in to help tell those stories.
That's awesome. I was actually going to ask you about Special Olympics because I feel like there are many brands that need to, to your point, right? Special Olympics is really an important and meaningful organization to me, especially with the work they do with people who have disabilities and getting them engaged and just helping them live much better lives. My Aunt Bernie was a Special Olympics athlete in the 80s. She had Down syndrome and lived till about she was 65. And I feel like Special Olympics has always been one of those organizations that does work that's meaningful to me, but particularly because we had a family member who was supported by the organization. We could see the difference it made in her life and ours, quite frankly, because she was so engaged and had so much meaning that came from being able to participate in those kinds of events. Could you talk a little bit more about that idea of trying to pull in people who are kind of adjacent to the direct, benefit of an organization? I feel like that's one of the bigger challenges in storytelling that I've always struggled with. And I've had to do it with a couple of teams, but, I feel like it must be really challenging to convince a broad audience to care about people with those kinds of disabilities if they don't see it in their lives.
Yeah, so if we take Special Olympics example in particular, I mean, when you show up at one of the events, you really see it and it really comes to life. But I think especially in the health space, if it's not a condition or a disease that has impacted you personally, it's not that you don't care, but you may be more invested in something else. Where I see the point of connection is through tapping to what's relevant to all of us and what connects us as values. We can all relate. It's that whole empathy, evasive and misunderstood concept of empathy. What do we feel about our family members? How would you feel if this was your loved one? So I think that's where impactful storytelling comes in. It's not getting bogged down with the glitzy, the latest and most shiny objects, but it's really kind of getting down to that humanity of it all and what you would care about as a human.
God, I love that. I love, I never really put it in those terms in it. Gosh, I get a little choked up when I think about it, but like your point about kind of empathy as that currency, right? That is out there and that should be in, people who care about, the compassion in the world, the fact that the world is kind and generous to everybody. That on-ramp almost of empathy seems like a great way to try and do that for people who, may not have that direct connection to the issue, but really are invested in that kind of empathy that we, hopefully all have in our hearts and motivates us to do things that make a difference. Are there any other are there other organizations that you care about, right? Maybe that you're not working with, but are there some that you think are doing a great job or like I remember probably 10 years ago, and probably more recently, I'm sure, like a lot of people would, we'd have our first meeting with a new organization, and we'd say, okay, so tell us about your expectations. What do you want to be when you grow up? When we make this investment and we improve your marketing, we improve the results, like who do you want to be? And the answer in so many of those rooms for a long time was Charity Water. And so I feel like, they're doing some amazing work, but I'm curious, like, do you look around and say, yes, this year the Charity Water is XYZ organization? Do you feel like there are people doing particularly great work that you admire?
Well, obviously, the ALS Association is doing
Yeah,
pretty fantastic job, and we're celebrating 10th anniversary of the Ice Bucket Challenge this year.
yeah,
So it's been 10 years. So I look forward to lots of people dunking water over their heads. There are different things I admire and respect about different organizations. I've seen a lot of really compelling work from organizations like USO, for example, and kind of really translating it, whether or not you have a loved one that's in the military. They really do build that connection. I think a lot of conservation environmental groups, I mean, some of it is just a very current and very relevant topic that impacts us all. So I've definitely seen some really compelling things, especially in how they tap into and engage some of the younger audiences that really do see this as their future, the future of the planet as theirs. Some of the women's rights, women's equality organizations are doing a fantastic job. I've seen some great work from organizations like the Covenant House. Health has always been where I've leaned into a little bit heavier, I would say. That's
yeah,
where a lot of my background is and experience. And it's not necessarily through connection to a specific condition, although obviously we all have some of that. I think it's the notion that you'd want your family members or yourself to have treatments, to have cures, to have to have things that make your quality of life positive. So I find that very compelling about the health sector, whether it's Alzheimer's, ALS, diabetes, cardiovascular health. So that's where I tend to lean into. That's probably what I know the best and connect with the most.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I have one more work question for you, and then I'll just ask you like one last fun question, if I may. All right. So when future us is watching this in 5 years, I would love to get your. Do you? And it's okay if the answer is no, but do you have a prediction for something today that's like small that in 5 years it's going to be like what everyone is doing? I feel like well, I'm not even going to put any ideas on the table. I'm curious. Are there
Yeah.
things that you're watching trend-wise that you think will blow up in the next 5 years?
I mean, I think some of the trends are out there. It's not, you don't have to look far to predict them. I think it's how nonprofits are using them and tapping into. And I think personalization is certainly one.
Mhm.
But I would like to see, maybe it's a prediction, maybe it's wishful thinking. I would very much like to see more of loyalty, connection building in the years to come, and taking some of that transactional nature out of it. We're seeing less engagement in civics. We're seeing less volunteerism. We're seeing fewer donors, and really the only counterpoint to that is to build connections that are deeper than just optimizing to get that donation in the door. So I
Yeah.
really would love to see more of that, return to the basics, if you will. But obviously, people is sort of what I tend to focus on.
Yeah, those two are fantastic. So, I love the idea that personalization will get better. I think, again, 20 years ago, like it was something of a miracle when we could make an email that said
Sure.
"Dear Olga" or put Olga's name in the subject line, and that was really something.
Mhm.
Today, we get to see lots of brands taking advantage of these tools that help you personalize the offer, the message, the timing, and then, do I see an ad when I walk in? Do I get a text from the coffee
Mhm.
shop? Do I, hear from the organization that's right around the corner? All of that kind of much richer, like experiential personalization, I think you're right, is gonna come up really big in the next few years. And I also like your focus on loyalty, right? And how do we get people in their small communities, right? Even if it's it's not like, hey, come out for a walk in Boulder, Colorado, but it's, hey, come out for a walk with these 5 people that we know you're connected to. I agree with you. I think there's a lot of work that could be done there to help us really just try to help people make those connections that they've already got more rich and more deep. Because I hope that will help with that thing you mentioned around, just a decline in civic participation and awareness and connection, truly. So those are great. All right, in 5 years, I want to come back and watch this and see how right you were. Tell me this. I know you're super busy, right? You manage LemonSkies. You do a ton of great work for ALS. You have 2 children. I know you were really committed to your health and fitness. Like, how do you? This is like that totally like. No, it's not that question, but it's not like, Olga, you are so awesome, but how do you do it? But I'm really curious, like, how do you balance things? How do you prioritize yourself in that sea of responsibility?
Yeah, not well. So, not well. I mean, I think there's a little bit of corner cutting. I may or may not have laundry baskets sitting in my laundry room that are not put away. So some of this cutting corners, some of it is really, when we talk about kids, and our kids are similar in age, really encouraging them to be a little bit more independent and doing certain things for themselves. Some of it is just sort of deciding what's important today versus what can wait for a day or two. And there are certainly days where it's just too much. Like, there are days where you feel like you're on top of all your things and caught up and ahead of things. And then there are days where you feel like you've fallen behind. People of substance, I would say, is a perfect example. If you've noticed, I've never committed to any degree of frequency with people of substance.
Yeah.
And that was by design, because if I said it was weekly, or if it was twice a month, or any certain frequency, I would feel compelled and accountable to produce that and provide that. So I try to do this as frequently as I can, just because it's a pleasure. And usually I'm not the one in the hot seat. But you have the advantage of knowing me for a long time. But this way I give myself some grace. So if this is not my week to do people of substance, so be it. And I try not to fret about it.
I like that. I like that kind of prioritization that lets you have the commitment to something without oversetting the expectation that it's, you have to serve it, and it's, one of those creative things that like ends up leaning on you. So that's really an awesome approach. Look, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and ask you a bunch of questions. I hope that we have helped the people who watch your series get to know you a little bit better. I'm excited for the next 50 people of substance interviews. Is there anything else you want to, whenever I interview somebody, I always wrap up with is there anything else you'd like people watching today to know or to?
No, this was great. And this was definitely a first change in the format, throwing me a couple curveballs here. So I just really appreciate the conversation. And I think one thing I just want to add, and this has come up recently, someone has asked me about nonprofit sector and kind of how do we learn about things. And, you sort of look around you, and we're a very collaborative bunch. We like to, even if you're what you'd consider to be a competitor, we tend to like to talk to each other and share knowledge, because there's sort of this common purpose. And I really appreciate it about the work we're doing. Your success just makes the world a little bit better. So if my knowledge helps you advance your cause while I'm advancing mine, it doesn't take away, lifts all boats, if you will. So.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great point to wrap up on. I think all of the people that you bring on to this program, they share tons of details about their lives, their work, and the results that they're getting. And I think that is unique to us as a nonprofit sector. I remember bringing one of my colleagues who had only worked for commercial consumer packaged goods companies to one of the fundraising conferences, and she was just blown away that somebody would get up and do a presentation and talk about their open rates, their click rates, their conversion rates, their average gifts, their reactivation percentages. She's like, they would never do this in the soda realm or the charcoal realm or any of those kind of CPG company conferences. So you're right, and I think that's something that is unique about us as a sector. And so here's to another 20 years of doing that, and another 100 interviews for LemonSkies and people of substance. So Olga, thank you so much today for your time, and thanks for letting me ask you a bunch of questions.
Well, thanks for being here, Peter.
Thanks.